You're listening to the Write Project podcast and radio program, a show about writing and modern Newfoundland author culture. This program is produced and recorded at CHMR FM 93.5 FM in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and is aired on other great stations in the province and elsewhere in the country. It can also be heard online at www.chmr.ca. I'm your host, Matthew LeDrew. Welcome to a very special episode of the Write Project podcast. Today, we've got a host of authors on to answer one of the most frequent questions that's asked of any author. We're asking them, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book? And today to answer, we have on, thank you very much. Next up, we have the author of Alligator, Lisa Moore. Lisa Moore, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before starting a book?
I don't do a certain amount before starting the book. The book is always done in tandem with the research because generally I'm starting from characters and I have to sometimes go find something out about where the character's milieu or where they're living or what they're doing, if they're an engineer or whatever they are, and I might need to know what particulars about that job or that place or a religion or any of those things. But I find that out as I'm going, and I do go to the Centre for Newfoundland. I have gone to the Centre for Newfoundland Studies, which has been a gold mine. And they're very helpful there and giving. But I find that the best research that I do is often word of mouth. I ask people. And I seem to learn that way the best. I seem to absorb information through listening better than reading. I mean, when it comes to research, I read other and absorb other things. But when it comes to research, I like to hear people tell me what it means or what happened or how it's done.
That makes sense. That's wonderful. And also very important because, depending on the subject matter, if you don't kind of get that, I'll call it testimony, at some point it stops being available through the natural progression of time, if you get my meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Tanith Frost, best-selling author of the Immortal Solus series. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before the beginning of a book, Tanith?
I do geographical research for my settings for my books. I do a lot of research on how long it would take for different kinds of wounds to kill people. I do research on... Actually, I would say that those are the two primary kinds of research that I do. And most of my research, the location stuff I like to have in place before I start the first draft. I at least like to have an idea of where things are happening, and then maybe I'll visit the place again and polish it up later. The other stuff I will sort of research as I go along, or if I come up against something that I don't know while I'm writing the first draft, I'll stick a pin in it, and then I will do the research before I revise.
Oh, that sounds like a really, really good process. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Morgan Murray, author. Currently, he has the book Dirty Birds with Breakwater Book. How much research do you do before starting a project, and how much time do you spend researching before beginning a book or beginning your writing for the day?
I don't know how people wrote books without Wikipedia.
Right? Badly.
I'm not a big stickler. Anybody who's read anything of mine, or when you read Dirty Birds, you'll see I'm not a big stickler for hardcore 100% accuracy and everything. I just need to be able to BS my way through it enough to have it believable to get to the point I need to get to. So I have a very lengthy explanation about how there's a activist part of a academic ornithologists, bird scientists, trying to declassify seagulls as seabirds and make them terrestrial birds because they eat mostly dump food. I know nothing about seagulls, so I just had to look up enough big fancy academic sounding words to make it sound plausible that these words would be coming out of a biologist's mouth. And maybe it didn't work, but
Sounds lovely.
It seems to.
Yeah.
And so just things like that. I just need enough to fudge my way through. I listen to quite a bit of Leonard Cohen, which the shine kind of wears off eventually. Just sort of, and different things like that. Looking for, I like to put Easter eggs in and a lot of sort of allusions to things and connections to different pop culture things and different things in the book and stuff. So I like to kind of weave some of that stuff in there. So every once in a while you come across a really great Leonard Cohen nugget where you're like, ooh, Leonard, what happened?
Yeah.
And so you can weave that in there and things like that. But I don't like, other than the fact that I lived the mirrored existence to Milton for several years, I guess you could call that research. But apart from that, I don't, go undercover and live as a bohemian poet in Montreal, other than when I did it for real.
Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have John Hass, author of The Reluctant Barbarian. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book or story?
Depends on what it's about. If I am doing something that's based in the real world, in factual, real time, I will do some research on it. For example, the story that I was telling you about, Damned Voyage for Writers of the Future, it's I had to research all the Lovecraft stuff, but I also had to research Jack the Ripper, and I had to research that entire time, and what I had to research thuggy cults in India and when they were active. The goddess Kali, and there's a part in the story where Cthulhu and Kali are confused for each other with these cults. So I had to do a lot of research for that particular story. But then for something like Reluctant Barbarian, which is in a fantasy world, where I get to decide what the laws of this world are, I'll do less research for something like that.
There's also a certain amount of, because of we've been reading fantasy and stuff like that, and superhero stuff our whole lives, we've spent 30 years researching it or more.
Good point. And and I know the reader will fill in the blanks with their own notions that they've already got. When you say zombie, you don't have to describe the zombie because the person can see it.
That's fair. That's a good point. I like that. All right. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Kayla Krantz, who's calling in from Detroit. She's originally from Houston. She writes the Rituals of the Night series. Kayla Krantz, what kind of research do you do? How long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
I don't really do research before I start a work. I really just kind of started, and as questions come up, I'll research them. Like, when I was working on my last piece, what I did, it came up where my main character was going to be in a search party, so I had to Google, like, how do you get involved in search parties, what do they do, what's the protocol, and then as the questions came up, it just kind of filled them in.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah, I tend to do it on the fly as well. I find that if not, I'll get bogged down pre-starting it.
Yeah, for me, if I just start researching stuff, I'll spend like hours, and I'll end up on a tangent researching something that has nothing to do with the information I needed. I lose a lot of time that way. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Candace Osmond, best-selling author of Dark Tides and Killer Me. What kind of research do you do, Candace, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
Years ago, back when I didn't even plot. I was what they call a pantser. I did no research. I worked based on just the knowledge that I had, or a couple easy things I could Google on the spot. But now, like for Dark Tides, I spent, I think, 6 months doing research about the pirate history of Newfoundland. I compiled about 8,000 words of notes and ideas, kind of thing that could help me, that could create jumping off points, kind of thing.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was quite a bit. And I said, okay, well, that's probably just a one-time thing. It was a very research-heavy project. But now I'm writing another series. It doesn't come out till the end of the year. And it's time travel, but it's about ancient Egypt. So, again, tons and tons and tons of research, and I'm in the same boat. I'm still doing research about 4 or 5 months later, and I'm up to like 10,000 words in notes. So, yeah. So, yeah, to answer it, lots of research.
Okay. No, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Matthew Daniels, frequent contributor to the From the Rock series, as well as the author of the upcoming novel, Diary of Knives. Matthew Daniels, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book? You are Mr. Research.
Yeah, the library degree kind of plays into that a little bit. It's kind of something that I enjoy doing, but in a lot of cases, especially if I'm writing, say, fantasy, my research is more seat of the pants. Sort of like if I'm writing a scene where a person is fishing, I might just do a few quick Googles to find out about like what kinds of fish they might be likely to catch based on their the climate of the area where they're fishing, what kind of techniques are out there, so I can describe that this person is, say, fly fishing, as opposed to trawling, which doesn't really make any sense. If you're just two people fishing on the side of a lake or something, you're not going to be trawling.
Okay.
Right.
I don't know what any of those things are, despite growing up in an outport.
I grew up in Labrador, where it's all lakes and forest and stuff. So I'm not big into the hunting and the fishing and the going mudding in your truck and all of that kind of stuff. I'm obviously your typical nerd with his nose in a book or playing a video game or what have you. But growing up in that town, there are certain things that you're just growing up in Labrador in general. Like you're going to be on a skidoo at some point. Just don't fight it.
Okay.
It's going to happen.
All right.
Right. There's a certain amount of that. So yeah, with the fantasy, there tends to be more of that sort of thing. Or if I'm writing, say, a quote-unquote mainstream story, contemporary, what have you, I prefer to avoid calling that sort of stuff literary stories, because that implies that genre stories don't have literary depth, which is just not how that works. No. But for a lot of those kinds of stories, it'll be mostly those kinds of on-the-fly, small question sort of things. There are some stories that are powered by research. For example, I have this idea of playing with creating a novel about skateboarding.
Okay.
Despite not being a skater myself, because skateboarding is one of those things that, because like I know a lot of people growing up who were skateboarders. My brothers are skateboarders, and it's a fascinating culture.
Yeah.
You meet a lot of interesting people, and I just don't feel that there are all that many stories out there that are being told, but there are a lot of stories that are available that just aren't, like, we're not hearing them. And that's something that I'm going to want to look into a great deal, because where I'm not a skater myself, I'm going to have to compensate for that with heavy research.
Or learn how to be a skater with your brittle old man bones.
Yeah, I've tried.
Yeah.
Either skateboarding or snowboarding, and I haven't figured out how they make the transition from having your feet on the ground to having both feet on the board without having your back on the ground.
Yes, me too. Same. I tried skateboarding once. I managed to be able to sit on the board. I can sit on it and go down a hill, as long as the hill is straight and there are no like bumps or obstructions that will flip me over.
So it's sledding.
Yeah, sledding in summer.
I love it.
But infinitely more dangerous, because if you topple off a sled, you're going to land in nice, soft snow. If you topple off a skateboard that you're using as a sled, you're going to land on concrete.
And you're not going to have a winter coat.
No, of course not. You're in cutoff jeans or something.
Right. So that'll be great.
Yeah. Oh,
And,
yeah. Yeah.
So I'll have projects that have research built into the concept like that, and you'll have the on-the-fly stuff, and then you'll have science fiction, which is, by the very nature, especially if you're going to have any kind of hard aspect to it, because soft science fiction kind of looks like fantasy with a technology coat of paint a lot of the time.
Star Wars. Yep.
I mean, well, Star Wars is fantasy with a science fiction coat of paint.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sort of thing where you're blurring those lines. Weston Scott Card does a lot of that. His stuff tends to be on the softer side, which is fine. It's not a flaw. Card stuff is great. Ender's Game is classic, but it's not hard science fiction.
No, it is not.
So if you're getting into the harder stuff, that's obviously going to require heavy research.
I imagine Arthur C. Clarke spent a good deal of time researching, for instance.
Yes.
Either that or was just gifted with all that intelligence to begin with, which it's not impossible.
I mean, that's true. But even if you are a scientist by background who's writing novels that are based on your background, for example, the Bones series, they made a TV show of it.
Oh, yeah.
I don't recall the name of the author off the top of my head. But presumably this is her field, and yet chances are when she was writing these novels with this character who is a forensic osteologist?
Sure.
Or, yeah, like you using your knowledge of your scientific knowledge of bones to do these forensic science show stuff, chances are this person had to do a fair amount of research, perhaps into the more legal side of things, the forensic aspect of it, perhaps more into the specific nuances of their field, because being a leader in your field doesn't mean that you have, off the top of your head, an encyclopedic knowledge of 100% of all information about it everywhere, ever.
That is a major flaw that media kind of did, where, like, if you're a doctorate of anything, even of, like, library sciences or whatever, if you have a doctorate, like, 90s media said that you had your doctorate in everything. Like, the Beast was a geneticist, who was also a physicist when they needed him to be, from X-Men.
Yes, and that does not track.
And sometimes a medical doctor, just, if that's what was needed. A doctor is a doctor is a doctor, as far as, like, 90s media was concerned.
Yeah, it turns out there's a lot more specialization than that.
Yeah. Even within fields. Like, if you have your doctorate in autopsy, you probably don't know how to operate on a live human, because keeping them alive was not your priority.
No, if they're alive on the autopsy table, something went terribly wrong.
Terribly wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
That has happened.
Being alive on an autopsy table, or
yeah, that there are. It's very rare, but there are a few stories of that occurring.
Wow.
Have fun with those nightmares.
Yeah, gonna need another drink soon.
Yeah.
Something a little bit harder than the tea I just finished.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Next on the line, we have Tyon Collective author Susan McDonald. Susan McDonald, what kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book?
I don't do a whole lot of research per se, because my books are quite non-technical.
Yeah.
The healthcare parts that do come up in books I generally know. I don't put a lot of things like guns that I would have to sort of hit the internet and make sure I know, and then talk to somebody who knows about guns. I have done a little bit of field work where, for example, in my first book, I had a situation with the police, and I wasn't sure the exact protocol and what police would say, so I talked to a police officer, and, well, actually, I talked to the son of a police officer and got him to take a look at the scene and read it over and make notes in the margins and make sure I was on track. And I did another thing for a short story where it was the character was landing a plane at a particular airport. And so while I was flying on a plane, I passed a note to the flight attendant to ask the pilot if he wouldn't mind looking over my scene. It wasn't until I realized afterwards, asking the flight attendant to give a note to the pilot is probably not the best thing to do in today's society. But I wasn't arrested, and in fact, what the pilot did between him and the co-pilot was they rewrote the scene on the back of the paper in pen with all the correct jargon and the exact coordinates for that particular airport. Can you imagine?
I would, if I was on a plane and a pilot gave that back to me, I would at once be grateful and also be, shouldn't you have been flying the plane?
Yeah. Well, that's what the autopilot's for.
That's true.
But, so those kinds of things, I do think it's really important to get technicalities right. And the reason I say this, my husband and I have written a whole series of articles for the New York Science Fiction Review, and where we talk about medical mistakes in science fiction.
Okay.
And how a lot of authors do end up making mistakes because they rely on Google. And Google is filled with garbage when it comes to medicine. And so you are far better off if you've got a patient with a strange hormonal condition to actually email an endocrinologist and say, do you mind taking a peek at this, or do you know somebody in your field who would take a peek at my work, or whatever? And a lot of physicians are really kind of pleased to be asked to do that kind of stuff, or to answer a quick question or that kind of stuff, because you can end up making some pretty serious mistakes. And my husband has ended up writing some very famous authors and saying, you've based your latest novel that I just read on the premise of this condition, which is actually entirely false.
Yeah.
So edition number 2 comes out, and those mistakes are corrected. So I think as a writer, you don't want to look stupid, because if you make obvious glaring mistakes, it throws your readers right out of the story, and that's the last thing you want to do. So you do have to do some due diligence about getting your research done, but do it properly. I guess that's the message.
I have started to, my first few books, I was very young when I wrote them. I was even young when they were published, and I missed a fair number of things like that. And I became one of my best friends, actually, that I met later on, is a, what's the word for someone who's a coroner?
Oh, well, a coroner.
No, but she's a forensic something.
A forensic pathologist?
Yes, thank you. One of my best friends that I met later in life is a forensic pathologist, and she read the books and enjoyed them, but pointed out all the things. She was like a good chunk of my books my first series hinges on the appendix, and I was under the impression that the human appendix was about the size of your fist, and it is not. It is not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. Yeah. It's about the size of about the size of a fingernail. And she was like, "Where did you get this impression?" And I was like, remembering back The Simpsons. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Dr. Hibbert does an appendectomy, and he takes out the appendix, and it's about the size of a fist, and then he throws it away, and it explodes like a bomb.
Oh my!
And that's where I got that. But I wrote it before the internet was prevalent, so I couldn't just Google it, and I didn't think to check on it by the time it was published. But now all my books get sent to her for medical checks, and she gleefully reads the early copy and goes, "You only messed up a lot," and then I fix them. But in those originals, I have a very sheepish. I've added too much was based on them with the series, so I didn't feel good changing them or doing a second edition. But when I did a later edition, I put an addendum in the back that was like, "I have taken great liberties with human anatomy. I do know that this, and this are wrong, and I apologize."
So and the one of the nicest things is having somebody write in the front of their book, a little thank you. Thank you very much for doing to doing this. So that an acknowledgement is really nice.
I would never
That's all the
disgrace
payment you
her
do.
by putting her name in one of my books. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Rebecca North, author of Elliot and the Impossible Fish from Breakwater Books. What kind of research do you do, and how, if you do any, and how long do you spend researching before starting a book?
The way it has worked so far for me is I have kind of come up with a book idea, and then I have to do the research after. So with Elliot, I spent a long time researching the way that the animals, different animals were fishing. I watched all these videos of them moving and the way they caught the fish, and it all got collapsed into just a few sentences, but it was actually a lot of research making sure that I had captured this, and I was giving children the correct information about the way the different animals were catching their fish. So I guess it's kind of so the question was how long I spend. Is that well, I think with Elliot it actually took me a while to make sure I was capturing that correctly. I'm not sure definitely I spent a few hours doing that, but yeah, it's kind of a backwards process, I guess, with my books. I've been getting the idea, and then afterwards I do the research, and I'm sure that Laurel has to do a lot more research to figure out how specific animals look or how to draw them correctly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever have to spend time researching to make sure something hasn't been done before? Because when it comes to a lot of authors, young authors or new authors that I work with are very worried about stuff that's been done before, and if they're writing novels, say, and stuff like that, my answer is always, don't worry about it too much, because everything's been done to some degree, you know what I mean? And
yes.
What's going to be different about your book is the way you approach it, and that it's, you know what I mean? You are the thing that's different. But like with children's books, because they're like small children's books with pictures and stuff like that, because they're pared down concepts and sometimes they're just explorations of one concept. Do you have to do research to make sure that exact thing hasn't been done before?
Yes, absolutely. Every time I come up with a book idea, before I go ahead and do it, I make sure that I've looked online and just made sure, I've done searches, that there's nothing that's exactly the same. There's always going to be, just like you said, there's always going to be similarities.
There's always going to be. I'm sure there was a book where a kid was fishing before, but that doesn't mean they approached it that exact way.
Yeah, exactly. So it's there's always going to be. So I made sure, I Googled that nobody had a book about a kitchen party with their grandmother before I wrote Nanny's Kitchen Party. But there's going to be books where somebody goes to their grandmother's house and they see animals there or something that, that's going to happen. So there's so many kids' books out there. You're never going to have nothing that reminds you of something else in your book.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah,
your concepts, even just I imagine there is a Robert Munsch book about animals in the kitchen somewhere. Not that it's the same as what you do, because just the whole kitchen parody and the way you described it, I'm that sounds really original, but that's why I thought Robert Munsch, because I'm oh my god, it sounds like something he'd do. You know what I mean?
That's a pretty big compliment, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great compliment. That is a kind of a way to think of your stuff. You've got that kind of rhythm and rhyme to it kind of thing. When I read your stuff, I'm this is Newfoundland Robert Munsch. I like it.
Oh, thanks. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, I love Robert Munsch, and I read his books constantly as a child. So I think that there's going to be reflections of other people, and you're writing by the people you're inspired by, right? So
absolutely.
That's going to happen along the way, because whatever you're reading at that moment is going to influence what you're writing.
All right, well, thanks for coming on again. For all of you, we'll be here again next week at 4:30 Newfoundland time or online at chmr.ca. Please tune in and we'll talk more about writing culture in Newfoundland.